Orson Petty took the water off her land in a parlor on a Tuesday afternoon, and he was kind about it, and he read the number out twice so she could not mistake it. 9 acres, he said. West edge. It runs from the fence corner down to where the ground goes white. Rhoda Merrick stood by the parlor door because nobody had asked her to sit. She was 21 and her father had been dead 11 days. The house still smelled of him. Pipe ash, wet wool. The sharp green smell of the ditch water he tracked in on his boots every evening of her life. Her half-sister Lavina sat on the good chair with her hands folded. Lavina was 38, and she had the look of a woman who had already been told the ending. And the upper 40 goes to Lavina, Orson said. Being as it adjoins ours. That's the ground with the water on it, Rhoda said. That's the ground that adjoins ours. She had known the shape of it since the second day. What she had not known was the last line. Orson turned the page and let his hand rest flat on it, and he said the thing she would think about for 3 years. The ditch shares go into the estate. They're Papa's. They were. Now their personal property. He reached into his coat and brought out a folded paper and laid it on the table between them, and he even turned it around so she could read it right way up. That was the part she never forgot. He was not hiding anything. See there, Willow Bend Ditch Company. 16 shares in the name of Alice Merrick. A share of stock isn't land, Rhoda. It's a thing a man owns, like a horse. It passes through the estate with everything else that isn't ground. She looked at her father's name in a clerk's careful hand. Then who has it? The administrator of the estate has it. He said it the way a man reads a weather sign. Until the estate closes. And you're the administrator. The court appointed me. I didn't ask for the job. That was true too. She learned later that it was true. He had not asked, and he had not cheated, and there was nothing crooked in the paper, and that was exactly the trouble with it. She walked to town the next morning and found the ditch company clerk in the back of the feed store, a soft, round man named Beale with ink on 3 fingers. He was sorry. He was very sorry. Water follows the certificate, Miss Merrick. Whoever's name is on it, that's who calls for the head gate. I only keep the book. Can the book be wrong? The book is only ever right, he said. That's the trouble with books. She asked about complaining. He told her that under Utah territory law, since the statute changed, water disputes went to the county selectmen in her county. That meant 3 men. He was helpful about it. He wrote the 3 names out for her on a scrap of paper so she would not have to ask twice. She read them on the walk home. She knew all 3. All 3 of them ran cattle on the same summer range as Orson Petty, and 2 of them had eaten at his table. Lavina came out to the fence that evening with a basket she did not hand over. He isn't wicked, Lavina said. I know. He's doing it by the law. I know that too. Rhoda took the basket. There were 4 eggs in it from her own hens, which meant Lavina had gone into her coop to have something to bring. That's what makes it worse, Vinny. If he was stealing, I could say so out loud. Lavina looked at the white ground to the west and did not answer and went home. He came himself at the end of the week. He did not get down from the wagon. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked out at the 9 acres the way a man looks at weather that is not going to change. 9 acres of salt ground, Orson said. I'll give you $40 for it. It's 40 acres of good ground you gave Lavina. It isn't worth $40, Rhoda. I know that, and you know it. He gathered the lines. I'm offering it because you're my wife's sister. Think on it. She stood in the yard until the dust settled back down on the road. Then she walked west, past the fence corner, out to where the ground went white and cracked into plates like a dropped dish. She put the heel of her shoe against one plate and levered it up. Underneath the salt, the earth was dark. It was damp. The valley called it the salt plate. and nobody in Willow Bend had ever tried to farm it. 9 acres of it, near enough. Whitish gray, crusted, splitting into slabs the size of wagon boards in the dry months. Gray sagebrush grew at the edges and gave up in the middle. There was one dead plum tree out there that her father had planted the year she was born, and it had lived 4 seasons and then stopped, and he had left it standing. Rhoda walked the whole of it on a Tuesday morning with a tin cup of water and no plan at all. What she had instead was a memory, and the memory kept coming back on her the way a splinter works up through a palm. She had been 8. Her father had taken her out to set the boundary stakes, and he had let her carry them all because she asked. They drove 9 stakes that day, 6 along the good ground, 3 out here. The 3 out here had come up wet. She remembered it because she had thought she had done something wrong. She remembered her father crouching down, working the 3rd stake loose, holding the muddy foot of it up to the light. Ground salty because there's water under it. Girla, he had said. Water comes up. Water goes off in the sun. Salt hasn't got anywhere to go, so it stops here. She had been 8, and it had meant nothing. She stood on the plate at 21, and it meant that the worst ground her father owned was the only ground he owned with water in it, and that no living soul could get at it, because it was 6 or 8 feet down and it was salt all the way, and nothing anyone planted in Sanpete Valley would put a root through that to find it. Lavina came down on the Friday and found her at the kitchen table with everything laid out on it. What's all this? $18 out of Papa's tin. 6 hens, the cow, a 1/4 acre of garden at the clay pit waters, 4 sacks of flour and Mama's shears. Rhoda did not look up. That's the whole of it. And the tax? $11 after harvest. Rhoda, I can count, Vinny. Then count it out loud for me, Lavina said, because I've been telling Orson all week that you'll manage. 18 against 11 leaves $7 to live a year on. And no crop, because a crop wants water, and the water wants a certificate with Papa's name on it. And that certificate is in a drawer in your house. Lavina did not say anything to that. She wrote the sum on the back of a feed bill after her sister had gone, and looked at it a long time. Underneath the sum she wrote 4 words, and then she sat looking at them for a long while. Something that doesn't need the ditch. She did not know of anything. There was nothing in Sanpete that did not need the ditch. Wheat needed it, lucerne needed it, the orchards needed it, the potatoes needed it. The whole valley was a machine for moving water out of the canyon and onto ground, and every part of that machine had a man's name on it. Orson caught her at the head gate on the Thursday. He was checking the boards, which was the administrator's business, and he did it properly. You've been walking that salt ground, he said. It's mine to walk. It is. He set the board and straightened up and dusted his hands. There was nothing unkind in his face. That was the thing about him. She kept waiting to be able to hate him, and he kept not letting her. I'll leave the offer open till the fall. $40. If the tax comes due and you haven't got it, the county sells it and then you've got neither. You'd buy it at the tax sale for less. I would, he agreed. That's why I'm telling you now. He touched his hat and went on up the ditch bank, and she watched him go, and she understood him perfectly. He did not want her ruined. He wanted the 9 acres because they lay between Lavina's 40 and the freight road, and he wanted them at a fair price with everyone's dignity intact. He was a patient man. He had all the time in the world. She had until the fall. The woman came into Willow Bend on a Monday in a light wagon with a canvas cover, and by noon she had set a folding table on the porch of the store. Her name was Cordelia Shaw. She was about 55, gray hair parted in the middle and pinned so tight it looked painted on, and she had come down from the north for the Silk Association, and she would be 3 days, and then she would go on to Fayette. On the table she set out 3 things: a flat woven willow tray, a paper box the size of a prayer book, and a small brass balance scale with a beam marked off in ounces. Rhoda went because everyone went. There was nothing else happening. Mulberry, Cordelia Shaw was saying, to about 9 women and 2 men. The white mulberry. The association gives the cuttings free to anyone who plant them, and the eggs free to anyone who feed them. We buy the cocoons back by weight. Somebody asked what ground it wanted. That's the beauty of it, Cordelia said. It doesn't want much. It'll take sand, it'll take clay, it'll take dry, it'll take ground with salt in it that would kill an apple tree in 2 years. She said it as a selling point, the way a woman says a thing she has said in 11 towns. It grows where nothing else will bother to. The porch went on with its questions, and Rhoda stood very still. "Ma'am," she said, "how much salt?" Cordelia looked up. "Beg pardon?" "You said ground with salt in it. How much salt?" "Because I got 9 acres that goes white on top and cracks in August, and there's nothing on it but 1 dead plum tree." The porch had gone quiet in the way a porch does. "I don't know," Cordelia said. And then, because she was an honest woman and it cost her something, "I've never been asked that. I've seen it take poor ground. I have not seen it take yours. But the root goes deep. The root goes very deep. That's the whole of the tree." She turned the brass scale a quarter turn without needing to. "Why?" "Because there's water under mine," Rhoda said. "That's why it's salt." She watched the older woman work it through, the way her chin came up. The small, sharp interest of a person who has been teaching a thing for years and has just been handed a use for it she has not thought of. "Then you'd not be watering it at all," Cordelia said slowly. "You'd be letting it fetch its own." "I haven't got any water to give it," Rhoda said. "That's rather the point." Cordelia Shaw laughed once, short, and opened the paper box. Inside, on a card, were silkworm eggs, hundreds of them, no bigger than the full stop at the end of a line. Her fingers went stiff opening it, and Rhoda saw it. "You don't like them?" Rhoda said. "I loathe them," Cordelia said calmly. 30 years and I have never once liked touching them. But 100 grown trees will keep a woman 5 or 6 weeks in the summer and pay her $300 for it. And I have not found anything else that pays a woman $300 for 5 weeks. So I go on loathing them and I go on doing it. $300. Rhoda held the number in both hands like something hot. Her father's whole wheat crop, the best year he ever had come to 2 of 12. "Does the association ask whether I'm married?" "The association asks whether you have leaves," Cordelia said, and wrote R. Merrick, Willow Bend in a ledger, and pushed a bundle of bare-rooted cuttings across the table, and did not look up again, which Rhoda understood was a kindness. She sold the milk cow to the Otley boy on the Wednesday for $6. 18 and 6 was 24. That was everything she had in the world, and she was going to spend it on rope, a mattock, lime, $2 of straw, and $1.50 of cheesecloth, and she was going to put 160 bare sticks into ground the whole valley called Dead. She was loading the last of them into the barrow when Orson Petty's buggy came along the road and slowed. He had the freight agent up beside him, a younger man in a good coat, down from the pass to talk about hauling rates. Orson looked at the bundles. He looked at the salt ground behind her. "What are you planting?" "Shade," Rhoda said. He laughed. It was a good laugh, unforced, genuinely amused, and he put his head back with it. The freight agent did not laugh. He pointed at her with 2 fingers, the way a man points out a thing worth remarking on, and said something Rhoda did not catch, and then he laughed too. They were still at it when the buggy went round the bend. She got 160 of them in before the ground got too hard, and it took her 11 days. The arithmetic of it was simple and unforgiving. 14 or 15 holes a day, each one 14 to 16 inches deep. which does not sound like much until it is the ninth one of an afternoon and the crust has gone to concrete and the mattock rings off it like a bell. She laid the rows north and south. She had thought about that for 2 evenings and decided it on her father's reasoning. Not anyone's book. A row running north and south takes the sun on its east face in the morning and its west face afternoon, and both sides make leaf. A row running east and west shades itself all day. The outermost row on the west she planted at half the spacing, twice as thick as the rest. That row would never be for leaves. That row was for wind. The valley wind came off the west bench every afternoon from May onward, dry as a flue, and it would take the moisture out of the young trees behind it if nothing stood in the way. So she gave up her best row to be a wall. On the 4th day, her palms opened. She wrapped them in strips off an old sheet and went on. And on the 7th day, she could not close her right hand around the handle, so she did not work at all. She sat in the doorway and ate bread and let the day go by, and that cost her more than the blisters did. Nobody laughed at her. That was the part she had not been ready for. She had braced herself for the valley to laugh, and instead the valley went quiet. Wagons slowed on the road, and people looked out at the woman planting sticks in a salt plate, and then they looked away, the way you look away from a person doing something you have decided is sad. Nobody said a word to her about it for 6 weeks. Silence, she found, sat heavier than mockery. Mockery at least admitted you were doing something. On the 9th morning she came out at first light, and there was a bucket of water and a loaf standing at the end of the first row. There was no note. There did not need to be. Nobody in St. Pete baked a loaf with that flat top but Lavina, who had never once got the hang of their mother's oven. It happened 3 times. Rhoda never mentioned it because she knew that if she mentioned it, it would stop. The 3rd time she left the empty bucket standing in the same place, rinsed, and it was gone by evening. That was how her sister said the things she could not say in the parlor. Of the 4 women in St. Pete Valley left ground by a father or a husband that year, 3 took an offer inside 2 seasons. Rhoda knew all 3. Mary Otley, whose husband Thomas drowned in the Sevier the spring before, took $80 in August for her share of the Otley bench, and took it for the same reason. Her husband's ditch shares were personal property under Utah territory law, and personal property went with the estate, and the estate did not go with her. She was a hired girl in her brother-in-law's kitchen by Christmas. Rhoda thought about Mary Otley a great deal that summer. $40, she worked out one night, would have kept her about 14 months as somebody's hired girl. The last rain of the spring came the night she finished, and she stood out in it with her hands wrapped in rags and looked at 160 bear sticks standing in white ground in the dark. And she had no idea at all whether she had just saved herself or thrown away a summer she could not afford to lose. By the middle of June, 141 of them had leaf on. 19 had not. She pulled the 19 and did not replace them, because the association would not send more until autumn, and because a person who has had 141 things go right is not entitled to weep over 19. The leaves came up broad and glossy and a green that had no business being in that part of the valley at all. From the freight road, a mile off, you could see a dark stripe on the white ground where there had never been anything. Cordelia Shaw came back in July and stayed 9 days, and taught her the thing that mattered. "You will lose worms," she said, on the first afternoon before anything else. Everyone loses worms. The women who quit are the ones who thought they wouldn't. The eggs hatched into things like black threads. They ate and were nothing. Then they ate and were something. Then they ate the way weather eats, steadily, hugely, with a sound in the dark of the room like rain starting on a roof a long way off. "Now attend," Cordelia said on the 4th day. "The young ones want it warm and they want it damp. Close, like a July night before a storm. The big ones want it cooler and drier, or they turn soft and die on you. Those are 2 different rooms, How much warmer? Enough that you'd unbutton your collar and not think why. Cordelia had no thermometer and no use for one. And damp enough that a cloth hung up at night is still limp in the morning. When they're grown, you want it a good deal easier than that. If the cloth dries stiff by noon in the big end, you've got it about right. And if I give them all the same, then you'll be right for one lot and wrong for the other. And the wrong lot is always the little ones, because the little ones haven't got the size to argue. She said it lightly, and it went in like a nail. Everybody builds one room the first year. Everybody. I've got one room. Then you build one house with two ends, Cordelia said, and you stop trying to make the whole of it agree with itself. Rhoda built it out of the ground. She had dug the clay pit at 15 to catch runoff, and the pit had been giving her clay for 6 years without her ever once thinking of it as anything but a hole. She molded and dried 400 adobe bricks over 3 weeks, laid up with her own mud and $2 of straw, and put a plank roof on it and lime-washed the whole thing white so it would not drink the afternoon sun. She set it with its long axis running north and south. The north end she built with the wall thick and left the shutters closed, and put a small coal brazier in it, and kept a wet cloth hung by the door, warm, close, damp. The south end she gave 3 shutters that opened straight through, so the valley wind could walk in one side and out the other, cooler, drier, moving. Between the 2 ends, she hung $1.50 of cheesecloth on a batten, stretched tight, and that was the whole of the mechanism, and it worked. She made the trays out of willow. She had meant to make them out of plank, and Cordelia stopped her with 2 fingers on the board. Feel that. Nothing goes through it. She rapped it. Board stops the air. Air stops, they sicken. It's not the cold kills them, and it's not the heat. It's the still. So Rhoda cut willow from the ditch bank, which grew wild along the water and belonged to no man's certificate, and she wove flat trays for 4 evenings until her fingers bled at the cuticle. And she thought about the fact that the only material in the whole enterprise that came from the ditch was the one nobody had bothered to write down. Orson came on the 2nd Sunday. He did not laugh this time. He walked all the way round the white building without being invited, and he counted the shutters, and he stood a while at the south end where the air came through. You built this with what? $2 of straw, Rhoda said. $1.50 of cheesecloth. The bricks are out of my own pit. And the rest of it? There isn't any rest of it. That's all it cost? He was quiet for a moment. He looked down the rows of young trees, and the dark stripe of them on the salt, and she could see him doing sums he had no figures for. $60, he said. For 9 acres of salt ground? For 9 acres. He put his hat back on. Don't be clever with me, Rhoda. 60 is more than it's worth, and we both know it. She said nothing at all, which she had learned was the only answer that ever troubled him. The first brood spun that week. She sat up 3 nights running and did not know she was crying until she found the tray blurred. She killed the second brood herself on the 9th of August, and it took about 4 hours. It came in hot that week, the kind of dry heat that comes over the west bench in the afternoon and sits on the valley like a hand. She went into the cocoonery at 2 o'clock, and the south end was stifling, and the big worms were sluggish on the leaf, and she did the obvious thing. She opened everything, both ends. All the shutters, the door at the north, the door at the south, and she stood in the middle of the draft with her sleeves pushed up and felt the air come through and thought, there. By 6 the south end was right. By 6 the north end was ruined. The wet cloth had gone dry and stiff on its nail. The little ones, 4 days out of the egg, needed damp the way a fish needs water, and she had stood in her own doorway and pulled it out of the room with both hands. She lifted the first tray, and the whole sheet of them came away from the leaf, shriveled, no weight to it at all. She carried the trays out one at a time, There were 11. She did it slowly because there was no reason to do it fast. And when she had finished, she sat down on the sill at the south end with her forearms across her knees and looked at the floor for a long time. It was not Orson Petty who did it. That was the whole of it. There was nobody to be angry at. She had understood half of the thing Cordelia taught her, and half was worse than none, because half had made her confident. She thought about $40, which she had not taken. She thought about $60, which she had not taken. She thought about Mary Otley and her brother-in-law's kitchen at Christmas, warm, fed, finished. Lavina must have said something at home, because he came out on the Tuesday. He stood in the doorway and looked at the empty racks and the stack of trays outside with the dead leaf still on them, and he did not gloat. She would have found gloating easier. Your father lost his whole first crop of potatoes, Orson said, the year he came into the valley. Every hill of them. He never told anybody but me. Did he? He did. He turned his hat round once in his hands. $70, Rhoda. Don't make me ask again. And there it was. He could not help himself, and she understood then that he genuinely did not know he had done anything, that in his head the two sentences went together, sympathy and offer, one honest man helping another. She did not answer him. He waited a decent time and went away. She sat in the ruined room until the light went orange and then gray, and somewhere in there she heard Cordelia Shaw's voice from the fourth day, not the lesson but the shape of it. You build one house with two ends, and you stop trying to make the whole of it agree with itself. She had done exactly the wrong thing. When the heat came, she had tried to make the whole house agree, one temperature, one answer, everything the same everywhere. And that, she thought, sitting on the sill in the dark, is precisely what I have been doing about the water since April. Trying to win the argument they were having, on the ground they were standing on, by their measure. She got up. She did not open the shutters again. She went the other way entirely. She made the warm end smaller. She dragged her mother's pine press in from the house and set it against the north wall and hung wet cloths inside it, and made a room within a room, 3 feet by 4, that she could keep damp with a kettle and a rag. The third brood went on to the eggs on the 15th. Of the 11 men who had gone before the county selectmen over water in the past 6 years, 9 had lost. The 2 who won had owned shares before they started. Rhoda had gone before nobody. She had spent 11 days planting and $24, and she had not once said the word water to a man with a certificate in his drawer. The third brood went up onto the straw and spun, and for 4 days the cocoonery filled with a sound like a fine rain that would not stop. They came off the straw white, not the chalky dead white of the salt plate, but a white with a shine in it. Held against the shutter, like a cocoon glowed at the edges, and it was the first beautiful thing that ground had ever made. She reeled the first skein at noon with the sun straight overhead and carried it out to the end of the rows to see the light come through it. That was when the buggy came by. The freight agent had the reins, Orson up beside him, near enough that she could see their faces. When she got there, "Worms," said Orson. "She's raising worms on a salt plate." They laughed the way men laugh at a thing they have already settled, and Rhoda stood on the white ground with the green rose behind her, arm still up, the thread hanging off her fingers clear as spun glass. Her face went hot. She did not lower it until they were round the bend. Nobody in the valley knew yet what it weighed. Cordelia Shaw came through Willow Bend for the last time that season, and she brought the brass scale. They did it on the porch of the store, because that was where the association always did it, and because a scale on a porch draws a crowd in a valley where nothing happens. Rhoda brought the cocoons in 2 willow trays with a cloth over them. "Off you go then," said Cordelia. The beam came up. Cordelia slid the poise along and read it and said a number in ounces and wrote it down and did it again with the second tray and wrote that too. And then she reeled a skein off in front of them all with the copper basin and the handreel, and weighed the raw silk on its own. The beam moved for it. That was what got them. A whole afternoon's work off 141 young trees, and the beam moved by ounces. Old Beale from the feed store said what everyone was thinking. That's never worth carrying to town. How much wheat do you buy in a season, Mr. Beale? 4,000 bushel, thereabouts. And how much of it came up out of a ditch? Beale opened his mouth and shut it again. All of it, Cordelia said. Every grain. You sell wheat by the bushel because wheat is cheap and heavy. And you can afford to be careless with it because there is a great deal of it. This is dear and light. A woman can carry a season of it under one arm. She wrote the last figure and turned the book round so the porch could see. Not an ounce of this came out of anybody's ditch. Weigh that while you're weighing. It's still a mighty small heap, somebody said from the step. So is a banknote, said Cordelia. Rhoda did not say anything at all. She was looking at her own name in the ledger with a weight beside it. It was not $300. She wanted that understood later when people told it wrong. The trees were in their first summer. The leaf was thin, and she had lost a whole brood in August with her own 2 hands. What she got was a little under a third of what Cordelia had promised for grown trees, and it was more than the $11 of tax, and it was the first money that had come toward her instead of away from her since her father died. She paid the tax on the 14th, in cash, with Beale writing the receipt. She had started the summer with $18 in a tin box and 1 cow. She ended it with the tax paid, 141 trees rooted, 400 adobe bricks standing up as a building, and no cow. And exactly as many ditch shares as she had begun with, which was none. That was the figure she turned over most afterward. Not what she had made. What she had never had and had stopped needing. People asked Cordelia first, which was the natural order of things. A woman with a wagon and a ledger is easier to ask than a neighbor you have been looking away from for 4 months. Cordelia told them to go and ask Miss Merrick, since Miss Merrick was the one who had thought of it. 2 came that week, then Beale's daughter-in-law. Rhoda walked every one of them out to the salt plate and made them stand on it, and levered up a plate with the heel of her shoe so they could see the dark underneath, and said the same thing every time. It's salt because there's water down there. That's not the problem with this ground. That's the whole of what it's got. Delphia Rowe down at Fayette had 11 acres of the same white ground, and Delphia had gone at it the way a sensible person would. She got up a petition about the head gate that spring, got 9 signatures, stood in front of the county selectmen in June, and was heard very politely for a quarter of an hour. It cost her $4 in town trips in the whole planting season, and she got nothing because in her time and in her county the men on that bench were not doing anything they were not entitled to do. Rhoda had spent the same season with her back to the head gate entirely. 11 days and $24 against a quarter of an hour and 4. Delphia came up that autumn and stood on the salt plate and did not say much, and went home with a bundle of cuttings under her arm. Orson Petty came in the last week of September with $70 and a deed already written out. He came in the afternoon, properly, in his coat, and he laid the money on the kitchen table in a way that was not vulgar, and he set the paper beside it, and he waited. "You've had a good little season," he said. "I'm glad of it. But a good little season isn't a living, Rhoda, and you're 21, and that ground still isn't worth what I'm offering." She looked at the paper for a while. Back, she stopped and started again. "May I ask you something? If I sign that, what do you get?" 9 acres. "What do you get?" she said. "That you can hold?" He frowned slightly. He was a patient man, and this was not a question in the shape he expected. So she got her father's papers out of the tin box, the whole of them, and she found the page she had been reading by lamplight for 3 weeks, and she put her finger under the line and read it out. She read out what she had been left. Not the fee, the use of it. The right to have it and work it and live off it for as long as she lived, and no right at all to sell it, and no right to put it up against a loan, and no right to leave it away by will. The ground was hers to hold and not hers to hand over. That was the whole shape of it, and it was the reason she had been helpless in April, because a woman who cannot borrow against her ground cannot raise $1 on it, and a woman who cannot raise $1 on it has nothing to fight with. She had read it 40 times as a description of her cage. She read it that week as a description of his. "You've been waiting 3 years, Rhoda said. For me to sell you a thing the law doesn't let me sell." The kitchen got very quiet. Orson Petty put both hands on the back of the chair. He did not argue with her. He was too good a man of business to argue with a line he could go and read for himself, and she watched him go and read it in his head, and watched him get to the bottom of it. "I'd have had it at the tax sale," he said at last. "You would have, if the tax hadn't been paid." She let that sit. "It's paid. Beale wrote the receipt on the 14th. He sat down, not in a stricken way. He simply seemed to decide all at once to be 60-odd rather than 56. He looked at the $70 on the table as though it belonged to somebody else. "I thought I was helping you," he said. And the terrible thing, the thing she thought about for years afterward, longer than she thought about the ditch or the shares or any of it, was that he meant it. He had meant it in the parlor 11 days after her father died. He had meant it at the head gate and at the shutters and standing in the doorway of a room full of dead worms. He had done every single thing by the law and by his own lights, and he had come within one clause of taking everything she had, and he had never once had to think of himself as a man who would do such a thing. Lavina had come in behind him at some point and stood by the door. "He's doing it by the law," Lavina said. She said it in the same flat voice she had used at the fence in April. Only now she was saying it to her husband, and it did not mean what it had meant then, and Orson heard the difference and did not turn round. Rhoda took the tin dipper off its nail. She went out to the clay pit, and she brought back a cup of her own rainwater, of her own rise, out of the hole she had dug at 15, and she set it down in front of him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he drank it and put the cup down, and picked up his money and his deed and went home. He came back the following August to buy leaves. Lavina had put in 40 trees of her own by then, and had taken eggs from the association like everyone else, and her worms had got to the 5th age in the 3rd week of a hot August and eaten her out of leaf in 4 days, which is a thing that happens to everybody once. So Orson Petty drove down to the west end of the freight road and got down off the wagon and stood at the head of the rows in the shade, waiting, because Rhoda was up the row and did not come at once. The trees were 4 seasons on, pollarded low, trunks white with lime wash, the heads of them grown out thick and meeting overhead in the middle rows. "Miss Merrick," he said when she came down. He had called her Rhoda for 21 years. "Have you leave to sell? How much do you want? Whatever you'll spare." She sold it to him by weight, at the association's own price, and did not discount it and did not mark it up, and he counted the money out into her hand and thanked her. He was standing under the branches while he did it. Neither of them mentioned it. She thought he knew. She had 412 trees by then, and in the 5th summer the crop came in at what Cordelia Shaw had said 100 grown trees would do, and then somewhat over it, and it kept doing it. She still held not one share in the Willow Bend Ditch Company. The head gate was opened and shut by men whose names she knew, and it had nothing whatever to do with her, and that was the point. Cordelia Shaw did not come back. She went on to Fayette that first autumn, as she had always said she would, and then over the pass, and after that, nothing. She had been in Willow Bend 12 days in total. A woman who stays becomes a person you lean on. A woman who leaves becomes a thing you have to do yourself. The girl came in the spring of the 5th year. 16, with a father lately dead and 2 brothers who had taken the meadow and left her the steep ground above the road that nobody could plow. She had walked 7 miles for cuttings. Rhoda did not give her cuttings. She went into the house and came out with the brass balance scale. She had bought it off the association 3 years before, when they sent a new one, and she put it in the girl's hands. "Go and weigh what you've got," she said. "There's nothing on it to weigh." "That's what I'm telling you." "Then weigh the ground." Rhoda closed the girl's fingers round it. Everybody in this valley reckons in bushels, and a bushel is mostly water, and the water belongs to somebody. Before you plant 1 stick, you go and find out what your ground has got that theirs hasn't. Mine had salt in it. Salt meant water. Yours is steep, so yours has got sun on it all day and cold air running off it at night, and I don't know yet what that's worth. Go and find out. Then come back and I'll give you the sticks. The girl came back in 11 days. She had found a spring seep under the 3rd bench. There was a thing the women in the association said to one another after that, for years, whenever somebody was handed the worst piece of a father's ground. Rhoda never knew which of them said it first, and it was not quite the way she would have put it herself, but it traveled further than she did. What the ditch cannot reach, the root reaches without trying. She lived on the 9 acres until she was old. She never owned water. She never went before the selectmen, and she never sued anybody, and no court in the territory ever heard her name. There is a way of losing that looks exactly like arithmetic. Somebody sets the measure before you arrive, bushels, acres, the weight of a thing in a scale you did not choose, and then shows you, kindly, patiently, with the figures right side up so you can read them, that you have come up short. You can spend a life arguing the total. Rhoda Merrick did not argue the total. She went out and found the one thing her ground had that nobody had thought to write down, and she grew it, and she sold it by the ounce. Rhoda Merrick's name is in no history book, and no court in the territory ever heard it. But somewhere tonight there is a person holding a paper, someone handed them right side up, being shown very kindly that they have come up short. If her story stirred something in you, we would be grateful for a like and a subscribe. It helps these stories find the people who need them. And tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and what the worst piece of ground you were ever handed turned out to be worth. Thank you for sitting with us. The end.